Elias Grossi was taken up in his spirit to heaven during a service at his church. He tells the testimony of incredible things he saw while standing before the throne of God.
I was at church playing guitar at the time. I was playing guitar with the youth group, and suddenly, God placed a desire in my heart to start glorifying Him. Then the preacher began to preach and shout into the microphone. The whole church was crying out very loudly, glorifying God. There was a tremendous power, and while this was happening, I was there, glorifying and worshiping God. I was in my place, set the guitar down beside me, sat down, and continued glorifying God. Suddenly, my spirit began to ascend. It kept going up and up and up. And as I climbed, there was no light, just a total darkness. I didn't see planets. I didn't see stars. I didn't see anything. So I went through that path ascending at a very high speed. Suddenly, I passed through a very large door, an immense one. It was the largest door in the world. I think it's the largest door in the universe. This door was open, and I passed through it at a very high speed. I realized it was a door because my perception was heightened at that moment. I was in spirit, and my body remained on earth. After that, I appeared in a room made entirely of glass. The floor and the walls were invisible. The walls existed, but they were invisible. However, I knew I was in a room, and this room was the throne room. Immediately upon entering this room, I was already on my knees. This happened instantly. I was in a spiritual body, which was somewhat transparent. While on earth, I was worshiping God, and upon arriving there, I continued worshiping Him. I crossed the vastness of heaven in 4 stages. I was pulled upward, something was drawing me up, and of course it was God. God was the one doing this work. Then I appeared before the throne, and when I appeared before the throne on my knees, I prayed, asking God to bless the church and people in general. After that, I stood before the throne. I was about 7 meters away from the throne of God, more or less. And it's incredible how in spirit, our perception of everything is so clear. There's no doubt, is it this or is it that? There was no doubt that one was really happening, and I knew my body had stayed at church, but my spirit, my spiritual body, my true self, had ascended to God. I was on my knees, face to the ground, with my arms and hands stretched out on the floor. The floor was so clean it was transparent. The place was silent. I put my face on the ground, bent my legs, pressed my chest to the floor, and rested my nose on the ground. My arms were on the ground. My hands pointed to God. I worshipped God because He is worthy of all worship. If you can put your face to the ground, do it, because He is worthy. He is the Creator. I was before the throne of the Father. Someone might ask, but was that really the Father? Couldn't have been the Son? No, that was the Father. There is only one God over all of us. Even the Jews know that God is the only one. There is no one above the Father. The Father is seated on the throne, and Jesus Christ sits at His right hand. It is written that when Stephen died, he looked to heaven and saw the throne of God and saw Jesus Christ seated at His right hand. There was nothing to the left. He didn't mention anything on the left, but at God's right hand he saw the Son. The Son is at the right hand of the Father, and He sits with the Father on the throne, which means He reigns together with the Father. Let's continue. Well, I was on my knees, then I stood up and stood before the throne of God. So I looked, and the first thing that caught my attention was a rainbow that was over the throne. It was in the back, as if it were above the throne, coming out from the top of the throne and wrapping around to the back in an almost infinite vastness. It stretched far back, falling and fading away. It was a bit thick at the beginning, curving in the shape of a covenant and then gradually thinning out. It was a rainbow with all the colors, all 7 colors. After seeing the rainbow, I looked at the throne and saw a white cloud. It was an extremely white cloud. It was the glory of God, the Shekinah of the Father. It enveloped the throne, and you couldn't see the Father's face. I looked down and saw that the throne was on top of a ball of energy. It was a gigantic sphere, almost like a massive planet. Planet is just a way of illustrating it. It was a giant ball of energy, and the throne was on top of this energy. I don't know what this energy was, but it was something immense. I could see some patterns on this sphere, like lightning bolts. It was very white, with the predominant color being white, along with some light blue tones. I looked at the throne of God, but I didn't say anything. And God didn't speak to me either. I was just observing. That's when I asked a couple of questions that aren't relevant to mention now. But what I want to share is that I asked God whom I would marry. I asked God, whom will I marry? Then a hand emerged from the cloud, from the Shekinah, from the glory of God. A hand came out, and I saw the tip of his arm. Suddenly a hand appeared, and at the same time a voice said, "You know." The hand made a gesture and then returned. After seeing that hand coming out and going back into the cloud of glory, I noticed that the hand didn't have the same divisions we have in our hands. Its fingers weren't like ours, some longer and others shorter. All the fingers had the same symmetry. They were almost the same size. It was indeed a hand, a man's hand, that made that gesture. And the answer to the question of who I would marry was, "You know." So I was left with that answer. And later on I realized that was it. You know, when you meet the person you're going to marry, you just know it's them. The answer was simple. But at the time, I didn't understand. I thought I had to have a vision of the person before getting married. But no. When I first saw my wife, I felt immense joy. And I knew it was her. That was it. After that question, I noticed that my body seemed a bit larger than my physical body. I was in a body that I could walk in. I had arms, a head, 2 eyes, a mouth. I could speak. I had ears and could hear. But I was in a spiritual body. I could see and perceive my body, but I didn't have the urge to keep looking at it, so I looked forward. After that, a brother who was at church here on earth touched my body, right on my shoulder, because he wanted to sing a hymn in the church after the sermon. Then God allowed my spirit to return to my body. I came back, regaining my senses, and realized I was in church with my hand on my forehead. My hearing gradually returned, and I started to hear the preacher again. Then I said, "Wow, it's so much better up there. I'm not going to pay attention to that brother." I stayed in my spot, and suddenly I reconnected and realized that I had returned to heaven. That's when I understood that everything was real. I had already seen the rainbow over the throne, God's hand coming out of the cloud, and I had already asked God about marriage. But this second time, God didn't want to answer anything else. The focus there was different. But even so, I had some freedom to ask unnecessary questions, things that weren't really relevant. When I tried to look at God's face, I saw a sea of glass in front of me with several diamond shapes. It was as if there was some kind of screen in front of his face that didn't allow me to see it. I was a bit disappointed by that, but as it's written in the book of Revelation, there is a sea of glass. After that, I returned to my body in seconds. You know, now whenever I pray and ask something from God, I can return again before the throne.
Did you enjoy the video? On the screen, you'll find some recommendations for similar ones that you're sure to like. Also, check out our playlists to binge watch more content like this. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Until the next video.